What if a group of people living in mainland Europe had DNA that almost no one else on Earth shares? Not an island cut off by oceans, not a remote tribe hidden in a jungle. A population in southern Greece, connected to the rest of Europe, yet genetically so unusual that in a database of over 500,000 tested men, their signature barely appears anywhere else. That's exactly what researchers found at the far southern edge of Greece, on the stony finger of the Mani Peninsula. A group of men there gave DNA samples for what should have been a routine population study. Nothing dramatic was expected. Maybe a bit of isolation, maybe some local quirks, but still clearly part of the broader Balkan genetic landscape. Instead, one of their main paternal lineages seemed to lead nowhere. Outside the Mani, it showed up only a handful of times. And when those rare cases were investigated, most traced right back to Maniot families anyway. For all practical purposes, this lineage had no meaningful match in the modern world. That's not supposed to happen. Not in Europe, where genetic variation has been mapped in extraordinary detail. Even isolated populations like Sardinians or Basques still connect to known branches. They might be distinct, but they're recognizable. What showed up in the Mani wasn't just distinct. It looked like something older, something that didn't fit neatly into the categories we use to describe modern Europeans. And that's where the real question begins. Because this isn't just about one remote peninsula, it's about what that peninsula preserves. The Mani is not an easy place to live. It's dry, rocky, unforgiving. Villages cling to slopes, stone tower houses rise over narrow strips of land. For centuries, outsiders described its people as fiercely independent, clannish, bound by family, shaped by long memory and local loyalty. Even today, identity there leans heavily on lineage and place in a way that feels older than much of modern Europe. For a long time, historians treated claims of deep continuity in places like this with caution. Every community believes it descends from something ancient. But belief isn't evidence. Oral tradition can preserve truth, but it can also preserve pride. So the safer assumption was simple. Maniots, like everyone else in the Balkans, were shaped by the same waves of migration, invasion, and change that transformed the rest of the region. But the genetic data made that harder to accept. In the 2026 study, more than 80% of deep Maniot men carried a specific lineage, haplogroup JM172, concentrated in branches that are rare elsewhere in mainland Greece. At the same time, lineages often linked to later movements into the Balkans were strikingly absent. The implication wasn't that Maniots were untouched by history. It was something more precise. They seemed to preserve in unusually concentrated form what southern Greece looked like before major population changes reshaped the region in the early medieval period. And that matters far beyond the Mani, because it tells us something fundamental about Greek ancestry as a whole. Most people imagine Europe genetically as one large family with regional differences. Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, all variations on a shared base. But that picture is too simple. Modern Europeans were formed by multiple ancestral streams that mixed unevenly. First came hunter-gatherers, then early farmers from Anatolia and the Aegean. Later came steppe populations from the north, bringing ancestry that became dominant across much of Central and Northern Europe. And alongside all of this, especially in the southeast, there were connections to the Caucasus and Iran, arriving through routes that didn't follow the same patterns as the northern expansions. Greece stands out because it followed a different balance. It retained more of that early Aegean and Anatolian farmer ancestry than most of Europe. It acquired Caucasus-related ancestry very early, and when later waves reshaped the continent, their impact in Greece was weaker, more uneven, and sometimes socially constrained. In other words, Greeks aren't distinctive because something unusual happened later. They're distinctive because some of the changes that reshaped the rest of Europe didn't fully reshape Greece. You can see the beginnings of this much earlier than most people expect. Ancient DNA shows that Europe's first farmers came from Western Anatolia and the Aegean, including Neolithic Greece. But those early Greek populations weren't identical to the farmers who later spread across Central and Western Europe. Even at that early stage, Southern Greek groups already carried a small but significant amount of ancestry linked to the Caucasus, something missing in the early farming populations farther west. So the divergence between Greek ancestry and much of Europe didn't start in the Bronze Age. It started at the very beginning of farming in the region. That brings us to one of the oldest debates in archaeology, the origins of the Minoans and Mycenaeans. When early archaeologists uncovered the Minoan civilization on Crete, It looked so advanced and so different that many assumed it must have come from somewhere else: Egypt, Libya, the Near East. The idea of a purely local origin had to compete with the appeal of migration. The first DNA studies began to test those theories carefully. In 2013, researchers analyzed mitochondrial DNA from Minoan remains. They were extremely cautious, discarding many samples that didn't meet strict standards. Only a small number were considered reliable enough to study. What they found pushed back against the old theories. The Minoan lineages aligned most closely with European populations, not North African ones. There was no sign of the characteristic African haplogroups you'd expect if the civilization had been founded by migrants from the Nile region. That didn't mean Crete was isolated. Minoan culture clearly interacted with Egypt and the wider Mediterranean, but it suggested something important. The roots of the civilization were local, not imported. Still, mitochondrial DNA only tells part of the story. The real breakthrough came in 2017, when full genome data from Minoans and Mycenaeans became available. The results seemed simple at first. Both groups were largely descended from the early farmers of the Aegean and Anatolia. They also carried ancestry linked to the Caucasus and Iran. Modern Greeks showed continuity with the Mycenaeans, though not perfectly. But there was a complication. The Mycenaeans, unlike the Minoans, also carried a northern component, related to populations associated with steppe migrations. At first glance, that seemed to fit a familiar story. Incoming groups from the north influencing Greek language and culture. But the details didn't line up neatly. One of the most famous discoveries in Greece helps explain why. Near Pylos, archaeologists uncovered a remarkable Bronze Age grave. A man buried with gold weapons, intricate artifacts, and objects in unmistakably Minoan style. He became known as the Griffin Warrior. By every traditional interpretation, he looked like a founding elite figure, possibly tied to new power structures in Mycenaean Greece. But his DNA told a different story. Genetically, he looked entirely local. Even more striking, he lacked the northern ancestry found in other Mycenaean individuals. So one of the most prestigious figures of early Mycenaean Greece did not carry the genetic signal often linked to incoming northern groups. That doesn't mean those groups didn't exist. It means the process wasn't simple. Other individuals from the same period did show northern ancestry. In some parts of Greece, especially the north, it could be quite high. But across the southern mainland, it remained variable and often relatively modest. Different studies measure this in different ways, but the pattern is consistent. The northern component entered Greece unevenly and never dominated in the same way it did elsewhere in Europe. And there's another factor that helps explain why. Social structure. A major archaeogenetic study in 2023 found unusually high levels of close-kin marriage in prehistoric Aegean populations. In some communities, a large percentage of individuals were the children of first or second cousins. That kind of endogamy slows the spread of new ancestry. Even if new populations arrive, their genetic impact can remain localized instead of spreading evenly across the whole population. So geography mattered, but so did social behavior. Together, they acted as a kind of filter. New ancestry could enter Greece, but it didn't always spread the way it did in other parts of Europe. By this point, Greek distinctiveness starts to make sense, not as an exception, but as a different balance. The early farmer base remained strong. Caucasus-related ancestry arrived early and stayed. Steppe-related ancestry entered, but unevenly. Later, historical layers were added on top, without completely erasing what came before. This becomes especially clear when we look at the medieval period. In the 19th century, a historian named Jakob Philipp Fallmeyer argued that Slavic migrations had completely replaced the ancient Greek population in parts of the Peloponnese. It was a dramatic claim, and it turned out to be too strong. Modern genetic studies show Slavic influence, but not replacement. In the Peloponnese, estimated Slavic ancestry ranges from very low levels up to around 14%. That's real, but it's a layer, not a reset. And across southeastern Europe, a similar pattern appears. Populations show mixtures of older Balkan ancestry and later influences, but Greeks retain more of the early Anatolian Neolithic component than their northern neighbors. The deeper structure remains visible. This is where the Maniots come back into the picture. Their genetics don't represent a completely separate origin. Instead, they act like a magnifying glass, showing what southern Greek continuity can look like when later influences are weaker. Their paternal lineages are highly concentrated, shaped by a strong founder effect and relative isolation. But even there, the story isn't one of total isolation. Their maternal lineages are more diverse, pointing to connections with the wider region. Continuity and exchange existed at the same time. And that's true of Greece more broadly. Greek genetics isn't a story of isolation. It's a story of selective permeability, of influences arriving but not always spreading evenly or completely. Even later periods reinforce this. The Roman and Byzantine worlds moved people across the Eastern Mediterranean on a large scale. Greece was part of that system. These movements added layers to the population, but again, they didn't erase what came before. And identity itself was never purely genetic. A study of ancient Greek soldiers in Sicily found individuals with ancestry from across Europe and beyond. They were part of the Greek world, but not all descended from the same local populations. Being Greek was never just about DNA, and that's where genetic evidence reaches its limit. DNA can tell us how populations are related. It can show patterns of ancestry, but it can't tell us how people saw themselves, what language they spoke, what culture they belonged to, or how they understood their place in the world. It gives us structure, but not identity. It also comes with limits. Ancient DNA is fragile. Heat degrades it. Only certain parts of the skeleton preserve it well. Samples must be carefully filtered. Statistical models can suggest multiple possible histories, not just one, so when something appears to have no match, that doesn't always mean it's completely unique. It may reflect rarity, drift, missing data, or a past that no longer exists in a clean modern form. In Greece, it's often a combination of all of these. So why are Greeks genetically different from other Europeans? Because Europe was never one uniform population to begin with. Because the Aegean was one of the earliest entry points into the continent and retained more of that early ancestry than most regions. Because southern Greek populations developed their own profile early on, shaped by both Anatolian and Caucasus-related influences. Because later migrations affected Greece differently, more unevenly, more locally, and sometimes more slowly. Because geography and social structure both limited how new ancestry spread. Because later, historical changes added layers, but didn't wipe the slate clean. And because the idea of Europe as a single category is much younger than the populations it tries to describe. The Maniots, standing in their stone towers above the sea, make that reality easier to see. Their DNA doesn't fit neatly into modern categories, not because they're outside Europe, but because they preserve something older than the categories themselves, and in a quieter way, so does Greece as a whole. Not a population apart from Europe, not a population untouched by history, but a population that still carries the memory of how Europe was formed, through multiple paths, uneven mixtures, and histories that were never as simple as we like to imagine.